But to me, what makes it not shallow, what makes it not about consuming or like gratuitousness is this connection to the self.
Hello and welcome. Thanks for listening in to Good Practice,
where we talk about what makes good creative and good business.
From Stocksy, the artist-led visual media co-op serving the creative economy, I'm Cohen, CEO.
And I'm Genevieve Ross, Creative Director, and we're your co-hosts. Season 1 of Good Practice focuses on conscious curation, the art and science of making strategic creative choices.
Curation is a practice at the heart of our day-to-day work with visual media at Stocksy. So we've invited friends and collaborators, creative professionals of various stripes, to join us in conversation.
Today's episode features Kristen Naiman, Creative Director of the Realreal.
Very excited to be sharing space this morning with Kristen Naiman and Genevieve Ross as we step into our Good Practice podcast. And I realize I'm going to have to invent a new word by the end of this podcast, Kristen, to identify the role that you play in the world of style and fashion, because it's one that's deeply pointed and personal and philosophical all at once. It's one that asks us to identify how we show up in relationship to the objects and experiences that we surround ourselves with. And you've really done that across your career, in that you write about this in your personal musings as the Chief Creative Officer of the Realreal, which is really the high-end marketplace for authentic luxury consignment, with, of course, the promise of recycle and reuse. And prior to that, Kristen, you were both the SVP of Concept and Strategy and SVP of Creative at Kate Spade, where I actually came across your work often. I don't know if you know about this, but I would hear about you literally from an in-store manager, or I would hear about your work from kind of through agency talk, but in these roles where you ran creative strategy, you ran storytelling, color and concept teams, all the way through to the in-store experience. You're also co-founder of the super fresh and fun fashion brand A Piece Apart, and most recently the editor of the soon-to-be-released book Stuff, the memoir of Kim Hastreiter, co-founder of the iconic paper magazine, through the lens of her vast and iconoclastic collection of art, fashion, books, and ephemera that she has amassed over 50 years of her life in New York City. And if I continue to muse on this extraordinary career at the intersection of all things fashion and creativity and commerce, you actually started your career as a stylist. You started your work doing stylist work for like Nylon, Teen Vogue, New York Magazine. What drew you to the field? Tell us a bit about how you got into it.
Well, I didn't start out, looking to work in fashion. I was a kid in college and I was actually studying writing. But, I had always, from the time I was a tiny little kid, my mom has a story that she always tells, that when I went to kindergarten, I came home from the first day of kindergarten, which was in Atlanta, Georgia, in the heyday of like preppy early 80s South. And I came home from the first day of kindergarten and I announced that I was like only going to wear party dresses to kindergarten for the rest of the year. And my mom was like horrified. Like it was like alligator shirts or bust, and I announced that and she was like, there was no negotiating it. Like it was not a negotiation. And for that entire year, I wore party dresses.
Did you even have any party dresses?
I mean, I guess we never really get through to how we like then fueled this vision that I had, but she never tells that part of the story. But I imagine we had a couple and maybe she found me a few more, but the family story goes that I wore party dresses the whole way to kindergarten. So I think that that's indicative of what I understood intuitively and maybe came into this world with some sense of, which was like how you dress as a currency, and it's a language more than anything. And you can use that language to set yourself apart. You can use that language to blend in. You can use it to cue things or indicate things. And so while I was studying writing, I was behaving styling and fashion in my life in a very natural way. In high school, I lived at the Salvation Army that was one town over from where I grew up. And, I would ride my bike there on Saturdays. It was like my big event. And at that time, it was like a small, socioeconomically diverse kind of little town with this giant Salvation Army surrounded by these like fancy New York City bedroom communities. And all of the women there, pre the Realreal, pre everything else, would dump all of their amazing stuff at this place when it was over. So it was like a sort of gold mine. It was like very fertile ground.
You totally take me back to that Salvation Army and kind
Yeah.
of imagining that the Realreal is kind of the new version of that, because those are so few and far between now.
I have family from Atlanta, Georgia, and also from Florida. And so, yeah, I remember your crocodile t-shirt sort of uniform and how different a party dress must have stuck out. But also the reflection on style being a form of communication in a language in itself. And sometimes it's framed more in a negative light as being performative, but it's also performative in the best way in terms of how you are bringing yourself into a space and into culture and communicating with other people visually, because that is like this unspoken language and a way of just projecting your own identity, but imagination and appreciation for beauty and for the ways in which, design and care of form and materiality all play into that as well. So last month, we released an insights report at Stocksy called The Curation Paradox, which discusses curation as this balancing act between personal instinct and cultural fluency and audience empathy. And we also describe how we're living in this genre agnostic moment where nothing is out of style and everything is sort of in play. So we're wondering how you navigate this aesthetic kind of free-for-all when you're building your edits at the Realreal, and how you think about creative leadership and empower a team to shape meaning through curation.
So I hear a couple things in that question, and I think I'll take them maybe one at a time. But the first one that I heard that really resonates with me is this question of, how in a sea of possibility we curate and we choose to curate, and then how I would lead a team to communicate that to others. And, for me, I think if you go back to that thrift store in suburban New York, like in the bedroom communities of New York City in the 90s, I think what I learned in that Salvation Army was how to know what I like, how to know and listen when the voice in my head says yes. And, I've been talking to my daughter actually some about that, who's recently found thrifting after having had me as a mom and probably like resisting it with all, she's come sort of full circle around to it. And we'll sometimes go into a thrift store and she's like, why are you so good at this? It's like annoying. Like, well, and you're like, I've spent 30 years practicing knowing what I like. And I think that the secondhand economy, and I think we are now in a culture where even if you're buying primary market, we are flooded with options and input to such a degree that it all feels like the secondary market, in the sense that no matter where you are and what you're doing, you're on some level looking for a needle in a haystack. And to me, the work of this that makes it, to get to the second part of your question, which is like not the negative thing that it's in some ways become, or the shallow thing that it's in some ways become, is to use it as a way to understand your own instrument and to understand your own radar and to connect back in with yourself and understand what you like and notice. Like, to me, good shopping, for lack of a better word, is good listening. It's good noticing. It's good curiosity. And it's good self-knowledge. And that is what I think we've gotten away from. And the other thing I heard in your comment was this idea that it has become something negative or bad. It's like consumption or shopping. And we can talk about all the ways that as an industry we've created that situation. But to me, what makes it not shallow, what makes it not about consuming or like gratuitousness, is this connection to the self and to what you know to be true and what you know to speak to you. And then as a result, the beauty you create around you, that's a projection of that. And that, to me, if there was one thing that I could do in this role at the Realreal, it's to help people figure out their inroad to their own radar and their own sense of their own radar. And so inside of that, in terms of leading a team, I've been working with my team to figure out how we can actually be an instrument for that, a voice inside of the mix for that, as opposed to a voice of any one particular direction. It's the Elia Turkle bag. It's this Roe Mary Jane. It's anything Miu Miu. And you're like, those all may be true, but it doesn't mean anything if it doesn't speak to you. Like, I love Miu Miu. I think it's fantastic. I don't like the way I look in it and it doesn't suit me. And so I don't wear it. And it doesn't matter. I have tons of appreciation for it, but it doesn't make it into my curation and my mix at this point in my life, at the age that I'm at, with the style tendencies I have. And how do we all come to know ourselves that well? I think that style is an opportunity to know oneself and know one's taste and to create the beauty that's a reflection of your self-knowledge.
I love that. And I also love that you framed it as the sea of possibility, because I framed it as the sea of sameness. And I think that's a really lovely distinction.
I love how you talk about being kind of almost this role you play in terms of being an inroad to your own radar and being able to tune in how to be an instrument of that. There's that great Jennifer Friedman quote about style, that it's about consistency and commitment to a concept. I love that. I mean, when I think about your style personally, Kristen, I don't think of you committed to a concept or as in a forever named theme, but I do think of you as a person that has an expertly chosen set of curated experiences that you've invited into your life. And then you're always, in a beautifully way, I don't mean just in a way that you're perfectly appointed to reflect what feels most real to you in that moment. And it stands out. It's different. It's fresh. It's chic. It's Kristen. It's why you're the creative director of the Realreal, right?
I think for me, the style that I always most admire is style that looks intuitive and genuine to the person, agnostic of the style itself. Like when you see someone and you're like, that person and what they've chosen feel very in tune. That to me is the best sort of style. And it's a little bit hard to articulate verbally, but you know it when you see it. Like, and I think for me, that's also why I loved style and clothes from the go was that it really was not really about style in the end. It's really about people. Like all of this is actually about people, and the style and the clothes are one of the languages that they use. And sometimes I like to think about it in the way it kind of relates to food, because I think we're much gentler on food in a lot of ways. Like food is joy, food is sensuality, food is connection. And then I think we come to style. And after now the back half of the 20th century that we've lived through and the sort of deep and hyper commercialization of all of this, we look at style and we think of it as shallow or consumerist or, superficial. And I think it's very similar to food. I think the way we dress, just like the way we eat, is an expression of who we are and how we want to be connected with. And it holds memory and it holds sensuality and it holds identity. And it holds origin, like where we come from. Like for the life of me, I cannot scrub my sort of like preppy roots. You know what I mean? Like I was raised by these two Jews that were like desperate to be super waspy. And like I couldn't get it out of my bones if I tried. And I'm okay with that. Like here we are. Like I've got my brown, cable knit sweater and moving on. And like, some days I want to look like that and some days I don't. And I think that is about self-acceptance and all these other things, but it's also about joy. I think there's a joy to dressing that gets lost in the, like, to what you were saying, the sort of Genevieve, the kind of the sameness as being the sort of shadow side of self,
Of all places for this to come from, I was reading an insights report that was just published by IKEA. And in this whole report, they don't talk about things, they talk about feelings. And it's all about joy and playfulness and how, the shape of meaning that we create in our own homes. And I mean, tangentially, yes, the inference is what we have around us, that was materially, but it is also the playfulness and being rooted in somewhere, in something that, it's really important to reflect in your surroundings. I think that's one of the the bigger critiques of the modern minimalism, and I think it started in force around 2007 with the recession, but then also came back in a second wave around 2014 when like Marie Kondo's book became required reading for every millennial. And so, but this sort of like moral fetishization and ritualization of reduction and anti-materialism is contributing to this sense of disconnection to place, but also to our own histories, and that when we're kind of conditioned to want to live in a space where we could, through our lack of possessions or personalization, it's like we could have just arrived or we're just about to leave. And that has also been presented as almost like a goal, that you have this mobility in life, that you're not anchored by things. And I'm paraphrasing here, but in our conversation in the Visual Insights webinar that we had a couple of months ago, you said something to the effect of that objects in the world hold this aggregate energy of every step in the process of the curation, like what it is materially and where it was created, by whom and how, and what its journey was into your life. And I'm interested in the idea of style and curation as that communication system. And maybe if you had an example of one object and its particular meaning, or a story that you can tell through one object that's meaningful to you.
While I think about which one I want to talk about, I think I heard two things that I heard you say that I just would love to respond to. Because as you were talking about the idea of this minimalist place we've gotten to that has a moral aspect to it, the thing that I hear in that is that we're always conflating something that to me is quite separate, which is the amount of stuff we have with the value, meaning, and aesthetic of the stuff we have. Having a gratuitous amount of stuff, unless you're an avid collector and specifically out to do that, has nothing to do with the quality or the meaning that that stuff holds in your life. So in other words, I think that you can live in a way that's quite edited and focused while also living in a way that has warmth, connection, meaning, decoration, beauty, substance. And we have conflated them because we feel kind of sick about it. And to me, the Marie Kondo of it all is really like, it's like, eating something very clean the day after you got hungover, or the day after you're drunk and you're like super hungover. And so you're like, I could eat something greasy and try and make myself feel better, or I could like chill for 2 days and drink some green juice or whatever we're going to do. And to me, she's sort of that concept. The Marie Kondo of it all doesn't exist without what came before it. Whereas I think a beautifully curated life that is not necessarily expensive. To me, this is, of course, there's a certain amount of resource needed to have belongings, right? You need to be at a certain place. But Facebook Marketplace, secondhand, it's not about money and it's not about amount, but we've conflated the two. We have a major need to separate them if we're going to get back to a place of like healthy relationship to stuff and the sort of meaningful relationship to stuff. In terms of an object that I want to talk about, there's so many in my life, but I'm just going to do the thing that's sitting right in front of me because that seems sort of intuitive and simple. So I'm sitting at a dining room table that my ex-husband, it was from a farmhouse that he grew up in Vermont when he was a little kid. And it came with the farmhouse that he grew up in. And the reason why was because they couldn't get it out of the house when they sold it. So they sold this table. And so he grew up in this house. He has a ton of amazing memories in this house. They used to ski right near there. And my daughter really loves to ski. And when I got it, it was like this kind of Swiss chalet, sort of like grooved side, sort of shellacked redwood brown sort of situation. And I was like, that's not going to work for me.
Totally had me at shellacked.
Yeah, that sort of like chalet situation is not Vermont chalet vibe is not by way of Austria is not going to work for me. So I found this woodworker in Brooklyn, a young guy, and he cut the sides clean and he stripped it. And what we realized when he was finished stripping it was the entire table, and this table seats 8 at it very comfortably. The entire table was one single piece of wood. So it means it's from like an ancient tree, right? So he stripped it and it was like perfect and minimalist and gorgeous and beautiful. And when I split up with my ex-husband, he was like, I know you love that table. He was like, you're like, well, we had it was like we parted, but I kept the table. And now this has been my dining room table for 15, 16 years. And my daughter's grown up at it. And it was quite simple and minimal. And now over the course of the last 15 years, it's got like, and especially I've been noticing it a lot lately now, it's like, there's like little nicks in it and little ring stains and whatever. And this sort of patina as a way of personal history thing is starting to like bloom on this table. And every once in a while I'll be like, oh, I should refinish this table. And then I'm like, or I shouldn't, because patina is history. And I spend every single day at it. and I love it. And it wasn't quite right for me, but there was a part of it that was right for me. And so I connected with the part of it that was right for me. I adjusted the part that wasn't. I fix it up when it, gets dingy or wobbly or whatever. And we're in a relationship, me and this table.
I love that. I imagine that there was a deep intersection, or I don't know what the how it was that you, if you had worked with Kim Hastreiter prior, or that you stepped into the role as editor of the book Stuff. But obviously, there's a clear intersectionality between, as you've just described, your own love of the narrative and the history and the origin story. Tell us a bit more about that book, because am I correct? It's still coming out. I know it was just released.
It's just released. Yeah,
just
it's out. So that book, interestingly enough, like a lot of the best things in my career, came to be in a very intuitive, sort of funny, natural way. I've known Kim for 20 years. I worked in and out at paper for many of those years in different ways. And she and I would have lunch together once a year, once every other year. And I hadn't seen her since the pandemic. And about 2.5 years ago, probably now, yeah, 2.5 years ago, we decided to get back together with our friend Mickey Boardman, and we all went and had lunch. And she was like, "What have you been doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I've been working on this writing project. It's about the people in my life and objects that in some way play a part in our story." And then I was like, "What have you been doing?" And she was like, "Actually, I've been working for a bunch of years on this memoir through the lens of my stuff called Stuff." And I was like, we just both were like, "That's so nuts. Like, that's so weird." So we just agreed to trade work. Like, I showed her mine, she showed her hers. And we read each other's work. And hers was fully further, like mine was like, I showed her 60 or 70 pages and she was like, "I love this, keep going." Like gave me a bunch of notes, whatever. But hers was actually she had a full draft, but it was really it needed collaboration, like most good things in life. She needed a good editor. So she was like, "Oh my God, if you could like just give me some notes." So I gave her some notes. And I think because I connect so much with her vision in the world and was raised in many ways by the vision she set in New York, I'm a generation-ish and a half behind her. So but that is very much like the tradition of culture that I was raised in New York by her and by the culture she made. And also the way that I relate to objects is so deeply connected to what she was talking about that I had a unique understanding, I think, of where she was coming from. And that is something that through the course of my whole career, she keeps teasing me. She's like, "Who the hell knew that you had this crazy secret talent to be an editor? Like like you missed your calling." And I was like, "No, actually, it's what I do everywhere. No matter what medium I'm working in, I edit my team's ideas. I edit clothes and curations of both for myself and for others when I was a stylist. I edit films and campaigns and edit the ideas that go into those to make them good. In many ways, my entire career is in some ways trying to figure out what the best of something is and make it more that way." And so she and I started doing that with her book. We started sort of putting together and giving her some scaffolding. And like, "Did you think about pushing this way? Did you think about pushing that way? And you pull this little piece back." And we created what I would say is like an architecture for her to then hang this extraordinary thing on. But she is like a self-proclaimed sort of messy person. And she was very resistant, not to me, but to the world editing her or squeezing it into some format that she felt was too rigid or too whatever. So we worked really hard on creating something that was like sitting down next to her, meandering, brilliant, booming, insightful, no nonsense. Like it should feel like just sitting there with her and letting her walk you through this thing. But it's like the culmination of something through the lens of what had been amassed and accumulated. And I think that's very poignant for this moment, really, to look at things that way and to look at materiality that way.
Beautiful to hear the words tenderness come into it. Genevieve, you were talking about feelings coming into the kind of IKEA catalog of all places, which also, or IKEA Insights report. And this idea of feelings, as you're saying, being so resonant and so needed at this current tender time in our kind of critical world, facing such critical conditions in so many ways. But while the stories and narratives are personal objects, it also just so happens, right, that like Kim owns a Basquiat that she actually got herself from the artist living in the East Village at the time. I mean, kind of these pieces that are of considerable critical acclaim. at the same time.
And also circle back around to this thing we were talking about before, which is knowing your own radar. I think Kim is an absolute master at knowing her own radar. Her honing device for what she finds beautiful and interesting is completely singular. And she's really worked at that. You have to work at that. I think that's one of the things also that's maybe a misconception about style and aesthetics. Yes, there is a certain intuition and a certain knowing that people have about that, but it is a day in, day out practice. And that relationship with yourself of what you'd like to build aesthetically around you is actually practice. It's a practice and it's a commitment like anything else. And it's only happens when you're willing to slow down, notice, Genevieve, to your point, what are you feeling? What is this thing making you feel? What is it doing to your heartbeat when you see something that makes you like, do you notice that feeling and move through it? And I think we've trained people to listen to others, and it's easier to listen to others. Tell me what to do. Like it's like that feeling like you're overwhelmed and whatever. And you're like, just tell me what to do. Tell me how to look. But actually all of us have that radar in us. We do. And the question is whether we're going to slow down enough to listen to it and be curious about it.
Such a beautiful way to describe it as a practice. I have called this podcast Good Practice to really look at the terrific creative practitioners out there and say, what is your good practice? And so it starts to take off that pressure or that story about like, I'm over considering, and brings it into actually, I'm editing, I'm removing, I'm refining.
I'm noticing.
And I'm noticing. So thank you for the for the reframing of curating, editing, styling as listening and connecting and dropping in. I do have a question for you that I want to ask around good practice, and it's around your own practice as a creative director. But I'm going to drop straight into an activation because I'm so curious about your process and your creative practice around it. When you joined as the Chief Creative Officer of the Realreal, you created an activation. It was honed in and focused on kind of taking on counterfeit and addressing authenticity as a way to hone in on the narrative, on the focus of the Realreal, which is around authentic items. And you created the Canal Street pop-up, which, as I understood it, was a store of counterfeit to which you invited fashionistas, influencers, kind of the style community to step in and experience their own reaction to it. I'd actually prefer you to tell the story about it. And of course you have a team and there are other people, right? But it seemed to me that you had come in with like, this is my strategy and this is how we're going to tell that story. Can you fill us in both a little bit more on the event, but also how you got to that and your practice as a creative practitioner in landing that truly genius idea?
Sure. So to talk about the strategy piece of it to start, I think that great creatives are strategic. And I think strategists can be very creative. And there's a bifurcation, especially in the world of agencies, where it's like the strategist comes up with the idea and the creatives are supposed to paint it in. It's like my old boss used to say that when it's not working that well, the strategists just treat the creatives as what they call wrists. It's like, here's your coloring book. Could you draw it in and use some nice colors, please? And that to me never leads to great work, because great work, the strategy and the concept creatively are one thing. The insight and the concept are completely one thing. So in my experience, I have done my absolute best work when I am working with strategists who are my partners and who we are dialoguing together and who give me equal weight in what that strategy can be. So we start with the insight. And in this instance, the insight was, we know that out there on the internet, there are tons of people talking all the time about how we sell them fakes. And we also know that that is just simply inaccurate. We have 14 years of data on authenticity, on authenticating product. We are the world's leader in authentication. The main luxury houses know sometimes, as does the FBI, to come to us when they're trying to work out some of this stuff because we have more data than anyone else. It's really hard to remember, but when the Realreal started, one of the ways that it was so visionary was that took on this idea of authentication right from the start. And I don't know about you, but like I've been shopping secondhand my entire life. And 15 years ago, it wouldn't have really occurred to me unless I was inside of a dodgy kind of consignment store and a bag looked kind of plasticky. Like authentication was not at the top of my mind. But this conversation around fakes and dupes and authenticity has really come a very long way in that way. And it's a really complicated topic because the roots of dupe culture were actually socially progressive and insightful and like very much about exclusivity and very much about poking at exclusivity in a joyous, playful way. Like the roots of it are actually very similar to what the Realreal is all about, which is about how to give people access to really quality luxury things without having to be at this place of buying $10,000 worth of plates at Hermes before they'll even talk to you or whatever it's going to be, you know? And so what we knew to be true was that we weren't being seen for the skills and the amount of real expertise that we had around authenticity. And so we were like walked into a brainstorm, my whole team, and I'm called the chief creative officer, but I have all of brand. Like I have brand strategy, comms, social, creative, and PR. So the leaders of those groups, we walked into a room and we were like, how are we going to combat this problem? So we started with the problem, which to me is the insight, right? The insight is the problem. The admitting that you have something to address is the beginning of it. So we walked into this room to do that, the heads of these different functions and some of our key people. And it was actually our head of copy who we were talking about like how we're going to get people to know it. And our head of copy was like, we should just throw up a store on Canal Street. And like all the heads in the room turned. And that goes back to this editing thing and this thing of leadership, which is like, I think when I was a younger creative, earlier, greener, forget age, but you know, like earlier on in my arc, I think that my idea of my job was to hold a vision, to have the vision myself and then hold that vision and be like, get on this sleigh and let's go, like get on board and let's go. And as I've evolved as a leader, as I've grown as a leader and as a person, I really do see my job now as being a listener and listening to everything in the room and pausing that room and being like, that is a genius thought. It's a genius statement. It's a genius thought. Let's pause. Because that's the kind of thought that could be very quippy and fly by in 1 second and nobody thinks the wiser. And then somebody maybe a day or two later was like, it's so funny what Kate said, you know? And you're like, no, what Kate said is the idea. And the idea came from us making fertile ground for that idea by using the insight or the problem. So we made the fertile ground for the thing. Somebody said it. We turned and said like, that is the idea. That's such a great idea. Let's pause. And then we proceeded down this road of how do we make that idea come to life? Because that idea coming to life was not a foregone conclusion. Like, how do you find a landlord on Canal Street? Who's going to build out our store for us? Who's going to make this thing? And I think for me, the question you ask is the answer you get, right? So, and to me, right now in the world, in marketing in general, but actually probably in the world in general, just like we think there's like this endless sea of stuff, there's this endless sea of people talking at you. And especially when they want you to buy things. And to me, good ideas connect with people in a deeper way. And they say something that's true, whether what your particular angle is on it or not is relevant to them. So we decided to call it Ask Yourself What's Real, because what we realized was, or what we started talking about was that everything right now in the world is throwing that up into question. We're living in the time of AI. We're living in the time of fake news. We're living in the time of, fake art. And if you ask yourself what's real, what's behind that is, does it matter? Does it actually matter what's real? I guess you have to start by asking yourself that. And so what we said to each other was the concept has to ask that question. And it has to use our unique perspective into that question as a way to communicate it, but it actually has to throw up to people something that might touch them and make them feel like, yeah, I've been asking myself that too. So that's how that project came to be. And then there were a million lucky, wonderful, kismety kinds of things that happened. Like I knew a friend who knew a landlord and the guy happened to have a space. And I had another friend who was running an agency who was looking for interesting projects to do pro bono, who happened to have an expertise in a retail practice. And Mythology, which is the agency that did that, came on board and built that store for us for free to be inside of that project with us. And the landlord, gave us an unbelievable deal because the building was empty anyway. And it was like, he was happy to have it used for that reason. And I think that is what I would call a flow state, which is like we put something into the world, which actually landed for every person we connected with. And as a result, the doors kept opening. And in a matter of like 2 months, we made that project. And
Love that. Yeah.
up until the day that project launched, we had no idea if we were going to get like creamed for it or not. We didn't know. Like we thought there was totally a chance that people were going to be like, we had no idea what the response was going to be.
Sounds like one of the reasons for that, and in both defining it as is really at the strategic level, less about it being fake is bad and real is good, and more around how does it matter to you, and giving people agency and being able to explore that for themselves as any good art show would, and then allowing people to be able to reflect from that place as opposed to being told. Kristen, I love how you've described the trajectory of your career, one that I can relate to very well too, in that there was a point in your career where you were the initiator, arbiter of good ideas, the sort of creator, initiator of good ideas. Now you're at this point in your life where you're really tuning in more, right? Listening more deeply, reflecting on, I know a good idea when I see it. I happen to be a brilliant stylist, editor, curator. I know it when I see it. And that idea you just came up with is great. Let's run with that. But as you look into the next 10 years and look back on what has ostensibly by any book been a remarkable and brilliant career, what would make this time period feel meaningful and real and wonderful to you?
The first thing is that what I'm trying to do right now, what I intend to do right now and want to do right now, is to use my voice, my platform, my experience to talk about the ways that we can have a healthy and vibrant and enriching relationship to fashion, style, and consumption, and to use the love I have of those things and my belief in the ways that they can enrich people's lives as a way and an inroad into understanding how we evolve them forward so that we can move them away from where they've been, which is in this kind of consumerist place of acquisition, and towards a place that's really more about self-knowledge, self-relationship, and the ability that I think objects have to, as you started this conversation with, hold energy, all of that. So whatever I can do to put my voice in the world and to raise those conversations and to bring those conversations is what I would like to do. No matter what you do, it's actually about finding what your truth is in that and trying to do it at the outermost expression of what you're capable of. And I see that as my intention. And then my other intention is to do less, and to do less in a way that what I choose is really intentional and really exciting to me, and that it allows me a flexibility and a freedom to say and do what I want, but only say and do what I want. And to me, I think that's the ultimate luxury and the ultimate success, is to do that. And I think as I think about getting older, it's really hard to imagine not working. I love to work, and I love to think, and I love people, and I love talking to people. I'll be talking till I'm blue in the face. But I'd like to do that with more intentionality and more discernment, so that there is space in my life for all the other things, the cooking, the friends, the gardening, the kids, the life. Because as you move on in these things, you realize that when you're 95 years old, what you're going to remember is that dinner in the garden. It's probably not going to be that conference you spoke at or that thing you were on, as much as all of that is so enriching and amazing,
Thank you. And for what it's worth, I absolutely see the blend and balance between the doing less and bringing forward that which is so unique and the story you have to tell, and how you can really support all of us in shaping this whole conversation around consumerism and shifting it to one of reflection rather than one of stress and anxiety. Super powerful. Thank you. Thank you, Kristen, for sharing your insights, your stories, your reflections, and most importantly, your good practice with us. It's been such a treat to chat to you.
Yes, I've loved it. And thank you so much for the thoughtful questions and the great conversation.
Thanks for also being able to unpack our questions for us. Super helpful. Yeah.
All right.
Fun.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
all right.
guys.
Thank you so much.
Kristen. Bye.
Thank you for listening. We hope you'll follow along or subscribe to Good Practice. Season 1 continues with Amy Carvajal, creative executive and founder of Amy & Co.
Good Practice is brought to you by Stocksy, the internet's first and only artist-owned cooperative stock media agency.